Hey YouTubers, so this is something that's basically not anything I've ever done before, but I do know people in the general film community do this stuff all the time, and I kind of wanted to try my hand at it. So obviously this isn't necessarily my most original idea, but at the same time I have done a whole lot of speculation, fan theorizing, and also kind of writing my own fan fiction for a long time now. So this is just something kind of a little bit more open and broad about this stuff. I want to actually put it out there for you guys to basically interpret however you see fit. So with that being said, with Spider-Man Homecoming coming out, I just wanted to kind of, I guess, reintroduce myself to the Amazing Spider-Man series that Sony put out a couple years ago and how they tried to basically, I guess, reboot the Sam Raimi films and basically create a Spider-Man cinematic universe. Now, obviously, I think that was probably a really bad idea, but considering the fact that the first one wasn't necessarily a huge disappointment, at least for me, I know there are people out there who think that is a huge disappointment and they don't want to see anything even remotely related to the Amazing Spider-Man movies, but I'm not necessarily going to go into that right now. I just, for one, without basically talking about what I did and didn't like about it, I thought the movie overall was enjoyable. So with that being said, taking everything from that movie and kind of putting it into an idea of what maybe a sequel, hypothetical, if I was in charge of this stuff. And like I said, this is basically just a general outline. I haven't written a script or anything. I don't necessarily know where one scene goes to another or how people interact or something. I just kind of took everything that I liked from the original Amazing Spider-Man movie and put it to its best use and a hypothetical sequel. So with that being said, let's get right into this. So honestly, I think what we do is we open just a few minutes after the end of the original film. Basically, we saw Peter Parker going all around New York City and I guess following a lot of cop cars in order to see what was going on. And when he arrives at the spot, it's surrounded by cops, and as soon as we get to see exactly what's going on, we're kind of awestruck because we realize that the person that they're chasing is Spider-Man. And in all the ensuing chaos that kind of erupts with this and all the fighting that happens between this Spider-Man and the imposter Spider-Man, you have the imposter Spider-Man basically get the upper hand on Peter Parker, take his mask and give him some kind of ominous message like your days are numbered, Spider-Man, or something like that. I mean, not anything kind of too cynical, but at the same time something to at least give us some kind of sense of dread and everything going into like that. And of course, with all the cops not really knowing what to do, Peter Parker basically gets away, especially since he doesn't have his mask. He has to basically get away as quickly as possible. And then we basically hit the opening credits. And one thing I would really like to see with the opening credits is a bunch of Daily Bugle headlines kind of showcasing and illustrating the fact that this imposter Spider-Man is just basically ruining Spider-Man's reputation, and no one necessarily likes Spider-Man anymore. They think he's a menace to society, and Peter Parker just really can't do anything about it at this point. So at the very beginning of the movie, after the opening credits, we open up on Gwen Stacy's valedictorian speech because that's what we basically got in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, but the only real difference here is that Peter Parker is actually in the stands because with all of the stuff going on with the imposter Spider-Man, he doesn't necessarily have the public image to basically go around and web sling and do everything that he used to. He's trying to solve it at this point, but he doesn't know how. He doesn't know how he can keep up with this guy who seemingly is like almost at every single turn, and he necessarily can't catch him and he can't actually beat him. So with that being said, he's sitting in the stands and he's listening to his girlfriend give this speech. And one of the things I really want to just kind of take an aside here and say is the first movie made its bed and now we have to sleep in it. They didn't have to, but they decided to end the movie on a high note with Gwen and Peter Parker basically getting together, but despite Gwen's father's rejection of him and wanting her to be safe and everything like that. And I think we have to kind of stay in that. I mean, no stalking, no breaking up for no reason at the beginning of the movie. We have to keep them together. And personally, I actually really like this idea because I think Gwen Stacy is a really cool, strong character, especially the way that she was portrayed by Emma Stone. And I would really like to see her continue on in this franchise. So what that really means is we are not ending this movie with Gwen Stacy dying. I refuse to do that. In fact, I thought that was probably one of the reasons this movie actually failed as hard as it did, is because I thought, at least watching it from the first time, both this movie and the first movie, was Emma Stone's character was what was actually holding the film up. So if you get rid of her way too soon and the emotional impact isn't there, then you lose a whole lot of your audience. And I guess that also goes to show I'm not necessarily a huge fan of Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker. I don't mind his Spider-Man. I think he does play a good Spider-Man, but if you don't play a good Peter Parker, I don't necessarily know what you're doing. I don't necessarily know why you were chosen for the role. It's like Batman and Bruce Wayne. If you can't play Bruce Wayne, you don't necessarily need to play Batman, but that's just a huge aside for this. And that's essentially my C plot of this entire movie is how are these two people actually getting along in their relationship after everything that happened in the first movie? We have Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy trying to kind of make this stuff work, despite the fact that Peter Parker is Spider-Man and all this negative press is going on around him. Now, she knows the truth, but at that point, it's affecting his psyche, and he doesn't know how to actually do anything about it. He doesn't know how to fix it, and of course, she can't help him, so it creates a huge dynamic between them that ends up kind of plaguing them throughout the film. And we kind of work on that and kind of build off this. Maybe they're fighting a little bit more. Maybe we start to see some kind of unraveling that's going to happen later on in the franchise, but not necessarily in this franchise. I think at this point they are still really strong. And so anyway, as Peter and Gwen are basically dealing with their own relationship, one of the things that we're seeing throughout the movie is New York, along with the Daily Bugle being probably the best example that we can kind of illustrate throughout the film, is basically turning its back against Peter Parker because of this imposter Spider-Man doing all these things, robbing banks, robbing people, hurting people, all this other stuff. And considering the fact that potentially this imposter doesn't necessarily look like the Spider-Man everyone's used to, but here and there you actually get to see the Spider-Man that Peter Parker actually is, you have this idea that potentially this is all kind of a conspiracy theory and that nothing actually really ever happened, and people start to forget like all the craziness that actually happened in the first film. And honestly, this would kind of really serve to make, I guess, not only the original film, but also this film more of a personalized film about Peter Parker and his struggle with actually being Spider-Man, and not necessarily this large-scale situation where he has to actually fend off and save an entire city from turning into a bunch of lizards. I never really liked that concept, but it was something they did in the original film. So my idea actually is, how do we kind of downplay that concept between everyone in New York? I mean, they can't necessarily ignore it, so if they start thinking it was all kind of a conspiracy theory or hoax in order to play up this concept of Spider-Man as the city's savior and all this other stuff, and people start thinking and honestly believing that Spider-Man never really existed and all this other stuff, and everyone else is just kind of imposters. In fact, you can also kind of do a wink and a nod to the audience, kind of indicating that there are people out there, potentially maybe even a Stan Lee cameo, that shows that like they think that potentially there are clones of Spider-Man, and that's just like a wink and a nod to everyone who kind of knows what that's all about. Meanwhile, you have Irfan Khan's character from the original Amazing Spider-Man also trying to kind of figure out what's going on as well, because at this point, even though there's all these kind of rumors and speculations going on, he still believes, in fact, he has actually learned that because of Richard Parker's research that they potentially found because of Dr. Connor's work with the lizard stuff, they realize that they have potentially a cure for Norman Osborn in Spider-Man's blood. So one of the things they do is they call on Kraven the Hunter in order to actually go and find Spider-Man and actually to hunt him down. And it's kind of implied that even though they were working with Connors in the original film, they had other, I guess, options in order to try to save Norman Osborn. And one of the things was Kraven's magical serum that he uses in the comic books. Of course, at this point, you can make it like some kind of science serum or something that gives Kraven super strength and slows his aging and stuff, and he's much older than he really should be. And for whatever reason, it actually works on him, but it doesn't necessarily work on Norman Osborn because of whatever, I guess, situation or sickness that he actually has, but we'll basically get to that later. And so basically we have Kraven the Hunter going out amongst all of this bad press, and he eventually kidnaps and captures the imposter Spider-Man. And when they take off the mask, they realize that it is none other than the chameleon who has been kind of impersonating Spider-Man just for the fun of it. Now, like I said, I'm not necessarily sure on all of the ins and outs of the Spider-Man universe. I understand that in the comic books, Kraven and the Chameleon are somehow related to each other, basically half brothers, I think it is. But this is a movie context and everything. They don't necessarily need to be related in order for these guys to actually, I guess, have a stake in wanting to get Spider-Man, or kind of taking each other into the concept of wanting to get Spider-Man. In fact, one of the reasons I like these two villains is because not only are they two of the most popular Spider-Man villains, and they also kind of work to play into whatever Sinister Six movie that the studio would actually be looking to make in the near future. If this movie were to have come out and this was my idea going into it, I think one of the cool things about both of them is that they're not necessarily Peter Parker's friends or enemies or anyone else like that. One of the things that we've gotten in all the Sam Raimi films and at least, The Amazing Spider-Man and obviously The Amazing Spider-Man 2, is that most of the people who hated him or tried to fight him were basically his friends or somebody he knew, someone who could basically have him on speed dial. And I really hated that concept. I mean, he had connections to everyone that he was actually fighting. In fact, I think that this is a good opportunity to basically get away from that and have Peter Parker fight people who he didn't necessarily create. I know the whole concept of Electro in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 definitely kind of put itself into that situation where it wasn't necessarily Peter's fault, but at the same time, he was so obsessed with him that I kind of fit it in the exact same category. So I really think having Kraven the Hunter and the Chameleon basically going up against Peter Parker when Peter Parker has nothing to do with their existence in this universe is something that would be really kind of novel for this series and help us push forward with the idea that potentially just because Peter Parker is in this world, he doesn't necessarily create every single person that he actually fights. And I would really like that idea. But honestly, I don't necessarily know exactly what would happen, but I would imagine that Kraven the Hunter and the Chameleon would basically team up together to lure Spider-Man in. Maybe Chameleon basically pretending that he's Gwen Stacy, and we have kind of a fake out moment if they really wanted to play it up like that, of Gwen Stacy potentially dying or something. And at that point, Kraven basically fights Spider-Man. They have their final climactic fight. Spider-Man gets the upper hand with Gwen Stacy's help, because that seemed like a pretty big of a theme that they were pushing a lot in the Amazing Spider-Man movies, is that Peter doesn't necessarily do it alone. And one of the reasons I really like that is because Peter, at least the Andrew Garfield Peter that they actually showed throughout this film, didn't necessarily seem like a super genius to me. And I feel like even though they implied that pretty heavily in The Amazing Spider-Man, they would really need to kind of dial it back in this movie in order to kind of allow Gwen Stacy's character to be at least the brains behind Spider-Man's brawn and make them work as a team instead of actually having her be the damsel in distress every single time. It's one of the things I really appreciated about the Amazing Spider-Man movies, and I would just want them to basically continue that trend. In fact, even make it more so where she is that much smarter than him that she does every kind of technical thing in order to actually help him win any given fight. And that's how they work together. So basically with their teamwork and everything, they take out the bad guys. They don't necessarily kill them because, like I said, they're making the Sinister Six movies, or at least that's what we're kind of anticipating, right? So they put him in jail. Everyone has a happy ending because of everything that's going on. All the concept of an impersonator Spider-Man basically goes out the window, and Spider-Man gets his reputation back. Everyone is better off at the end of this movie, and Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy are better than ever in their relationship. And obviously, we ended on a happy ending. Now, just for fun, I don't necessarily have anything else than that, but personally, let's just kind of go over what would happen. Then, I mean, obviously you have them doing the Venom movie and everything like that, but we're not going to focus on that. We're going to take this as if it was like an old-timey fashion franchise where one film, the next film, and no indication that we're going to have to see other films and other franchises in order to know everything that's going on in a Spider-Man movie thus far. So I really think the thing that we go from there is obviously a mid-credit scene where we have Norman Osborn dying and leaving his entire company to Harry Osborn, kind of setting up the sequel, or the third film, where obviously I think that's where you actually end up playing the whole Gwen Stacy dies card because of the Green Goblin, who actually is Harry Osborn at this point, and you don't necessarily need to stuff that into the Amazing Spider-Man 2. Obviously that would create kind of a nice little end trilogy situation where Spider-Man is not necessarily the same way that he was throughout the original films, and it's much darker of an ending. And then the fourth film, you have basically Peter is still still grieving over the death of Gwen Stacy, and then at the same time you have the symbiote come in, take over him, allow him to basically fixate, or at least give him a physical outlet in order to actually show all of his grief and anxiety and everything that he's doing there, give him the power where he can actually stand up. Basically the exact same thing as Spider-Man 3, but not overstuffed. And then at the same time ripping it off and ending up fighting Venom and basically shedding himself not only of his emotional baggage, but also the physical embodiment of what that emotional baggage actually was. And then I guess at the very end of the movie, you can have kind of an uplifting moment where I would imagine he basically goes to see a play or something starring Mary Jane Watson. And I don't necessarily know where you go from there. I'm sure a lot of people in the comment section below are going to have an idea of exactly how you would put all this stuff together and create, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, of amazing Spider-Man movies. And obviously that's what Sony really would have wanted. But this is just my, I guess, general outline. Not really an idea of how scenes put together or anything like that. I really think that this would be a much better movie than what we got. But I honestly think a lot of people put a whole lot of hate on the Amazing Spider-Man movies. And I know they're bad, but I've always kind of enjoyed watching them. And I know, like I said, not necessarily because of Andrew Garfield, although I do think his Spider-Man was good. I didn't like his Peter Parker, and I think that was a huge issue. I really liked Emma Stone's Gwen Stacy, and obviously I would really just want to see more of her. I thought she was a little bit way more of an empowering character than Mary Jane Watson's character in the original films. And honestly, that's all I really have to say about that, guys. Tell me what you think about this in the comment section below. Do you like this idea? Do you do not like this idea? I mean, everyone's open to their opinions. How would you fix the Amazing Spider-Man 2 and the Amazing Spider-Man 3 and 4 and 5 and 6? Do a Venom spinoff, the Sinister Six? I mean, I'm sure there are people listening to this who know way more about the franchise than I do. So what I want you guys to do is comment all that stuff in the comment section below. I just cannot wait to hear everyone's opinion. Do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Share this video out to all of your friends, and I'm going to catch y'all on the next video. It's been real.